At least until I became 12, my early memories are mostly pleasant ones. That marked a change in everything. That dawn reminds me just as it was yesterday. Mom was wailing in their bedroom as my dad was packing. Confused and terrified, I stood in the door of my room and watched him down the stairs carrying 2 big suitcases. There is no justification. There's no farewell hug. Not anything. Just the sound of the door closing and his automobile roaring to life in the driveway. Though I thought he would come around at any moment, I hurried to the window and saw his silver Honda vanish down our street. He failed, though. Mom was in the kitchen later that day. Her red and swollen eyes from sobbing caught me. "Why did Dad drop off?" I inquired, hoping she may help me sort through all of it. She slapped her coffee mug down so forcefully I jumped. "Because he is a cruel, selfish person, Shyla. He dropped his own child and doesn't even pay child support. Your father is a man of that sort." Back then, I knew nothing about child support, but Mom's voice's hostility terrified me. This is not how I had seen her before. She cut me off forcefully when I tried to probe more. "Just ignore him. He has not earned our tears." First, I couldn't stop thinking about Dad. At night, I would lie awake wondering whether I had done something wrong, if only somehow this was my fault. I kept expecting him to show up or phone my university. Nevertheless, he never did. The agony began to lessen as weeks stretched into months. Mom correctly said, "He was a traitor having turned away from us." Trying to be the perfect daughter for Mom, I pushed myself into school and my interests. After Dad left, she seemed so shattered. I wanted to make her happy. Just the 2 of us established fresh routines. On Fridays, we would have pizza and movie evenings. Occasionally, she would let me assist her in the garden on weekends. Though everything was different, we were managing. Mom then began dating once Dad left roughly 2 years ago. Steve entered our life at that point. At first, he appeared friendly enough, giving Mom flowers, driving us both to supper, and inquisitive about my education. Looking back now, though, I ought to have spotted the warning signals. About 3 months into their relationship, he stated one evening, "Your mom tells me you've been staying out late with your friends." Though his voice was laid back, there was something in his gaze that unnerved me. "Just until 6, I declared. Mom said it was okay." Though it didn't reach his eyes, he smiled. "Well, things will be somewhat different here from now on. A 14-year-old girl need organization." I recall staring at Mom, hoping her response would be one of advocacy for me. She simply clutched Steve's hand and grinned fiercely at him nonetheless. That's when I first sensed it, that tiny movement in the ground under my feet, like everything I knew, was ready to alter once more. Once Mom and Steve were married, my life underwent transformation. It was first a rigorous curfew. By 5:00 p.m. sharp, I had to be home. None of exceptions. Then arrived the chore chart, which listed every single daily assignment I had to finish. Steve would ground me should I have missed even one item. When Dad insisted I clean the whole kitchen by 6:00 p.m. every day, I objected, saying, "But I have volleyball practice after school on Thursdays." Steve responded sharply, "Then you'll have to quit volleyball. Your chores at home come first." I turned to Mom for help, but she just nodded along. "Steve's right, darling. You will wind up like your father if we fail to instill discipline in you." Every time I grumbled, she said, "Or you'll end up like your father." It stung every time, and for even challenging Steve's policies, I felt horrible. The regulations continued to mount up. After 8 p.m., I was not let use my phone. Steve could check on me from the kitchen table, hence my homework had to be done there. Rarely was permission obtained for me to get out with pals. Even my wardrobe became a problem. Steve insisted on authorizing my clothes before I departed for college. My biology teacher wanted to talk about my project after class, hence one day I came home 10 minutes late. Steve was red with wrath, waiting at the door. "Where were you?" he said fiercely. "Mr. Peterson had to talk about." "No excuses," he cut off me. "You ground yourself for 2 weeks. Flip over your phone." "However, that is not fair," I objected. "I was corresponding with a teacher." 3 weeks now," he answered, waving his hand. "Dilla and Tito make it 4. Saying nothing, Mom witnessed this entire conversation from the kitchen doorway. She simply groaned when I tried to explain later what happened. "Shyla, your father never did. Steve is attempting to teach you responsibility." Mom's announcement that she was expecting added still another level of complexity. Steve could not stop smiling. She was radiant with delight. Though something in my stomach suggested things were going to become worse, I attempted to be happy for them. Tommy, my half-brother, was born 15.5 years ago. I will say he was cute, yet his entrance completely changed my life. I became an unpaid babysitter suddenly, not only in charge of my regular responsibilities. Already dressing in her coat, Mom would add, "You need to watch Tommy while we go out." "But I had a history test tomorrow." I objected. "Family comes first," Steve would say. "Moreover, because your father doesn't send any money, we are supporting you. You can least help by doing this." I sat home with Tommy attempting to study with a wailing infant while I watched them head off on their dinner dates. Steve told me we couldn't afford new school supplies, but he bought Tommy fancy clothes and costly toys. Even on school nights, I had to get up and check on Tommy when he cried at night. Mom would add, "He's your brother," when I grumbled about tiredness, "and you have to help this household since your father doesn't pay alimony." I was bored with hearing about how big of a financial burden I was creating by the time I turned 16. Every time Steve or Mom opened their tongues, it related to their expenditure on me. I thus resolved to act about it. Near our house, the Morning Brew was a little cafe constantly in need of assistance. After school, one afternoon I strolled in and spoke with Sarah, the manager. Given that she hired me right away, she must have seen something in my eyes. Though minimum wages plus any tips I could earn was not fantastic, it was something. On weekends, I worked longer shifts, starting at 4 o'clock and ending at 8 o'clock p.m. The next 2 years were merciless. I would get up at 6:30 and to look after Tani, head to school, work at the cafe, return home to finish more housework and Tommy duty, then try to get in homework somewhere amid all else. My grades started to slide. Simply said, the daily hours fell short. I was heartbroken to find I lacked points required for a scholarship when graduation drew near. I recall trying to convey to Mom and Steve the tuition prices while seated at our kitchen table with acceptance letter in hand. I said, hopefully, maybe we could figure something out together. I could work more hours if you could help with just part of it. Steve nodded and laughed. Laughed, really. You should have considered that before allowing your grades to drop. Mom, bouncing Tommy on her knee, said, "We don't have money for your college. If you would study more instead of always hanging out with your work friends." I finally started working at Wilson Trading Company in an entry-level job. Long hours, mind-numbing job, and Mr. Peters, my supervisor, seemed to enjoy pointing out every little error I did. But with a genuine income, it was actually a job. Then arrived the shocking revelation. Steve summoned a family meeting following my third pay. "Now that you're working full-time," he noted, "it's time you started paying rent." I looked at him in incredulity. "But I already give Mom groceries money." Mom sprang in. "That's for food. This would be for your room, utilities, everything else." They had it all figured out, a figure roughly half my monthly pay would have consumed. I wanted to debate to highlight its unfairness. Still, what decision I had to make? Not including food and other expenditures, My pay would not cover rent anywhere else in town. The following 2 years seemed like quicksand trapping. Every month, I turned over a portion of my pay to Steve and Mom for Tommy's private swimming lessons and pricey toys. I wore the same clothes I had since high school in meantime. I lowered my head, though, and worked hard. Mr. Peters finally saw. He suggested me for a supervisor's opening that came available. Though not very much, the raise brought with the promotion was sufficient. Enough to enable at last escape. I came into a little one-bedroom apartment right across town. Though the neighbors were noisy and the paint was flaking, it was mine. Mom hardly turned around from tutoring Tommy on his homework on the day I moved out. She only advised, "Make sure you leave your key." Living on my own presented challenges. Though modest and in need of repairs I couldn't afford, at least it was mine. I stayed on at Wilson Trading, grabbing every overtime shift available. Still, barely enough remained to save after utilities, rent, and basic needs. While I stayed in the same place, I would see colleagues with college degrees rising the corporate ladder. "Shyla, you're one of our best workers, but without a degree, there's only so far you can go here," my manager had even personally said. College stayed only a far-off fantasy. During my lunch break, I would occasionally check university websites calculating tuition costs and always running short. Every scholarship I came across needed either full-time student status, which I couldn't afford, or better high school marks than I had. Mom and Steve hardly gave calls. Usually, Mom was inquiring whether I was attending Tommy's school functions or soccer games when they did. Usually, I came up with excuses. Seeing Steve shine with pride while my mother pounced over her ideal son made me sick. Then arrived that evening shortly after my 22nd birthday. Someone knocked on my door as I was preparing leftovers from China. My heart stopped as I peepholed through. There he stood, my father, looking 10 years older than he ought. "Shyla," his voice was precisely as I had recalled it. "Please, can we discuss?" I felt initially like slamming the door in his face. How crazy is him showing up after 10 years? But I stopped because of something about his look. He appeared almost weak and unwell. 5 minutes, I responded, keeping the door chain on. "That is all I ask," he answered. Took off the chain at something in his voice. Sitting at my little kitchen table, he shook slightly and turned down my automatic offer of coffee. Up close, he appeared much more pale and emaciated, unlike the robust, self-assured man from my early years. His voice almost above a whisper, he started, "I need to tell you why I left. I am not your biological father." The words really strike me like a physical blow. I dropped down hard on the chair across from him. "What?" "I had suspicions," he said in a firm voice now. "Your mother had been acting peculiarly, guarding her phone. I stumbled into messages. I underwent a DNA test. She came clean about having an affair when I confronted her." My head world-turned. To ground myself, I held the table's edge. "She begged me to forgive her," he said. "Then I couldn't stay. I saw her treachery every time I looked at you. It wasn't fair to you. In all this, you were innocent. Still, I couldn't manage it. Still, I paid the alimony always. Though I couldn't be with you, I made sure your financial needs were met." "What do you mean you paid alimony?" With a trembling voice, I asked. "Mom always remarked you never sent a cent. You weren't supporting me, hence she and Steve kept reminding me I had to aid Tommy and pay rent. Dad, or I suppose not exactly my dad, dug into his jacket and took out a big package. Inside were bank records revealing monthly transfers to my mother's account over years. $2,200 every month, without fail," he said gently. I arranged automatic payments the day I left. With shaking hands, I fixed my gaze on the documents. Every comment revealed the same. Regular monthly payments, all obviously labeled child support. Shyla? Years of existence. Tens of thousands of dollars I never would have seen a cent of. I started to get ill. All those years of hearing I was a burden, of working at the cafe in an attempt at study, of paying my own mother her rent, although she had been getting money intended for me every single month. Why are you here now? I pushed the assertions aside and inquired. After all this time. He moved uneasily in his chair, then seemed much more weak. I should let Shyla know some news. Two, indeed. Firstly, I am unable to have children. Shyla, second, I'm dying. Cancer is the diagnosis. I get 2 years at most from doctors. I sat there, shocked. Sitting at my kitchen table, telling me he was dying, was this man I had spent years despising, the one I had blamed for everything wrong in my life. After I left, I tossed myself into work, he said, made some wise financial decisions. For myself, I have done well, rather nicely. But I am not a family man, not one of my children here. And despite all, despite not being your biological father, I have never ceased seeing you as my daughter. What are you saying? I would like to designate Shyla as my heir. I want everything I have, the house, the investment properties, my savings, to go to you. The room whirled. Trying to make sense of what he was saying, I held the edge of the table. I had assumed this man had dropped out from under me, yet he had been helping me all along. He was also dying now and wants to leave his riches to me. I managed to remark, I need time to think about this. He nodded and then stood slowly. Of course, here is my card. When you're ready to talk, phone me. I dazedly guided him to the door. He looked at me one more last time before he went. For what it is worth, Shyla. I'm sorry. Not to leave your mother, she made her decisions. I'm sad to be apart from you. I ought to have figured out a way to tell you the truth. That evening I slept little at all. I understood what I had to accomplish by morning. My hands tightly grasping the steering wheel. My knuckles became white as I drove to Mom and Steve's house. Tommy was in school when Steve's car vanished from the pristine driveway. Mom looked startled to see me when she answered the door in her gardening clothes. Shyla, what are you doing here? Walking by her into the home, I remarked, we need to talk. Tommy's toys all around, his school pictures covering the walls. The living room looked just the same. Dad dropped over to see me yesterday. Mom froze midway toward the couch. What? Indeed, a fascinating discussion. He intends to name me his heir. He seems to have done fairly for himself. She what? Mom became red on her face. After abandonment, after refusal to pay a cent in child support, and you're just going to forgive him because he's got money now. I found it impossible to control. Mom stepped back as I began laughing. A sharp, bitter chuckle. That's rather humorous, Mom. Truly funny. For 6 years, he handed me his bank records included $2,000 in child support payments every single month. Where, Mom, did all that money disappear to? Since it most definitely did not reach me. She lost color from her face. Shyla, and that's not even the best part, I said, removing the bank records from my suitcase. He also explained to me his actual leaving motive, with relation to the DNA test about your affair. Mom dropped her hands, shaking onto the couch. You not understand. Oh, I really do understand exactly. You lied for years after cheating on him and being pregnant with me. Then you lied some more when he left after learning. You utilized his money, meant for me, for yourself and your newly formed family. I could have used that money. Mom shot out, you realize how hard it was being a single mother. And then upon Tommy's arrival, don't you dare try to justify this. I cried aloud. You pushed me through high school. I paid rent thanks to you. While you had hundreds of dollars of my money sitting in your account, you watched me fight to save for college. Mom's startled reaction turned into rage. I raised you. She cried loudly. I looked after you. Now you're going to side with him because he's dangling his money in front of you? Side with him. Though he may not be my real father, at least he was honest with me, Something more than I could say for you." Her face hard, she got up. "We are done if you accept his money. Are you clear about what I mean? This family will not welcome you any more." I gazed around Tommy's toys at the family pictures I wasn't in at this place I'd never felt comfortable in. "That's rather rich, Mom. Truly rich. Years ago, you made it abundantly evident that I belonged not in this family. The only change now is that I at last see the reason. I left the house, letting the door slam behind me. Mom never tried to stop me. My phone started throwing out alerts while I was at work. 'Have you seen your mother's Facebook post?' Carol had asked in a text message. I waited to look till my lunch break. There it was, a whole paragraph on her unappreciative daughter who had left her lovely family for the money of a deadbeat dad. With the theatrics, Mom had truly beyond herself, presenting me as the selfish, uncaring child and herself as the sacrificial single mother. The remarks were considerably more negative. "I find it unbelievable Shyla would treat you after all you have done for her. She was a challenging child always. Money shapes individuals. People who hadn't bothered to get in touch with me years ago were suddenly authorities on my life." As I started writing my reply, my fingers shook. "Since Mom wants to air our family drama on Facebook, let's tell the whole story. Let's talk about how she cheated on Dad and lied about me being his daughter. Let's talk about the DNA test that made him leave, and while we're at it, let's talk about the $22,000 monthly child support payments he made for 6 years, money I never saw a cent of. I have the bank statements to prove it. Where did all that money go, Mom?" I attached photos of the bank statements, making sure to blur out the account numbers, but leaving the payment amounts clear. The response was immediate. The same relatives who had been condemning me minutes earlier were now flooding Mom's post with questions. "Is this true, Sarah? What's going on? $22,000 a month for 6 years? That's $14,000. Mom deleted her post within hours. My phone kept ringing with calls from relatives, but I ignored them all. Instead, I pulled out Dad's business card and dialed his number. We met for dinner that weekend. It was awkward at first. 10 years is a long time. Somehow it felt right. He told me stories about his business ventures, and I told him about my job. When I mentioned my dream of going to college, his eyes lit up. "Let me help," he said. "It's the least I can do after all these years." 2 weeks later, I was enrolled in evening management classes at the local university. For the first time, I felt like my life was moving forward instead of standing still. Dad and I started having weekly dinners. Sometimes we talked about the past, about what really happened. Other times, we just talked about normal things: work, school, movies. He wasn't my biological father, but he was becoming something just as important, a real parent. Mom tried calling a few times after I exposed her lies, but I let it go to voicemail. Steve sent a text about tearing the family apart. I blocked his number. Tommy asked me at the grocery store why I didn't come to his games anymore. That one hurt, but I just wasn't ready to deal with any of them. Those 4 years with Dad were a gift I never expected to have. The doctors had given him 2 years at most, but he was always stubborn. "I'm not going anywhere until I see you graduate," he'd say, and somehow he made it happen. We made the most of our time together. Between my evening classes and his treatments, we'd meet for dinner at least twice a week. He told me stories about his life, his business ventures, and even shared old photos from when I was little. Sometimes we'd just sit in comfortable silence, watching old movies or sharing a pizza. "You know," he said one evening, about a year after we reconnected, "I spent 10 years regretting leaving you. Even after I found out you weren't biologically mine, I never stopped loving you as my daughter." I remember squeezing his hand, unable to speak through the tears. He came to all my college presentations, sat proudly in the front row, even when he was too weak to stand for long. During his better days, he taught me about business, about investing, about all the things he'd learned building his fortune. The last few months were hard. The cancer had spread, and he spent more time in the hospital than out. I took time off work to be there with him, studying for my finals in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside his bed. "You don't have to stay," he'd say. "Try and make me leave," I'd answer. He was there for my graduation, though he had to watch via video call from his hospital room. I brought my diploma to him right after the ceremony, still wearing my cap and gown. His smile was weak, but his eyes were bright with pride. "I always knew you could do it," he whispered. 2 weeks later, he was gone. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, telling him about my new job offer and how I was going to use everything he'd taught me. The inheritance was substantial: a beautiful house in the suburbs, 2 downtown apartments, and enough money to never work again if I chose not to. But more valuable than any of that were the lessons he'd taught me, the love he'd shown me, and the truth he'd given me. I rented the house and one of the flats, moved into one. Though I retained my employment regardless, the rental revenue more than covered my expenses. Dad helped me to see the need of creating something for me. Some of my cousins still attempt to be peacemakers, suggesting holiday get-togethers or family reunion with Mom, Steve, and Tani. I usually gently turn down requests. I've made my peace with the past, I say to them when we get together for holiday dinners, precisely planned knowing Mom will be present. But that doesn't mean I have to review it. They either know or at least they've stopped fighting. Aunt Carol even said she felt bad about trusting Mom's Facebook post without considering my perspective. Uncle Jim said he had long-standing doubts about the child support money but never voiced anything. Every day, Tommy looks more like Steve. Sometimes I pass past my old house and see him playing in the yard taller now. Mom still resides there with her ideal small family, and Facebook posts of flawless family pictures. Seeing them makes me less furious now. Really, I feel hardly much at all. Family, Dad told me, is about love, truth, and choosing to be there for someone, even if it's difficult, not about blood. Twice he decided to be my father, first when Mom married him, then once more upon his return into my life. That implies more to me than any biological link could ever allow.